Hello everyone, my name is Maddalena Ripa and I'm a researcher at Autonomous University of Barcelona. First of all, let me thank the organizing committee for having invited me today, and thanks to the audience. It's an honor to be here with you and having the possibility to share with you the preliminary findings of an Horizon 2020 project I'm co-leading about circular economy and the need to go beyond the current circularity practices. As a due promise, I must say that this project, named Just to See, Just Transition to Circular Economy, among the other broader aims, provides the space for a collective practicing critical reflexivity. In this case, being critical means, as Foucault says, transforming our ways of thinking, seeing and acting, and specifically questioning why alternative solutions, sustainability solutions, are often overlooked, why sustainability trade-offs are mostly not considered, and why the potential sustainability effects beyond the case boundaries are typically not reflected on. So why? We may want to critically reflect about sustainability, why we want to reflect about sustainability, because as we can see in this figure, the killing curve that shows the evolution of the carbon dioxide emissions since 1958 keep rising despite all the climate conversation we had in the last 40, 50 years with the IPCC reports, United Nations conferences, etc. So, I paraphrased the title of a paper of Professor Sergio Giorgiati published already 20 years ago, claiming the need of going beyond the business as usual approach. So, but why I'm saying that? It's not only an issue of quantity, meaning that emissions keep rising, but there is also a distributional issue. This means that being rich, especially ultra-rich, means being directly responsible either through consumption or control for the majority of the world carbon emission. For instance, the charity Oxfam has found that the richest 10% of people produce half of the world's carbon emission, while the purest half contribute just 10%. So a typical ultra-rich individual produces 35 times the carbon emission of someone in the bottom half and 175 times the amount of someone in the poorest 10%. So this brings another point on the table. We are not only addressing the environmental crisis in the wrong way, but there is also a fundamental social aspect of distribution, not only in terms of responsibility for producing emissions, but also in terms of uneven distribution of benefits and burden. So, but what has brought us here? I will use the concept of one of the fathers of ecological economics, Herman Daly. So, for much of human history, the human population was low. Its ability to harvest or extract natural resources and harness energy was within the carrying capacity of the biosphere. Therefore, in an empty world, labor and infrastructure were the limiting factor in human and economic development. In the empty world, fish reproduced faster than we could catch them, trees grew faster than we could harvest them, and minerals in the earth crust were abundant. In other words, natural resources were not really scarce. With industrial evolution and the use of fossil fuels, labor and infrastructure were no longer limiting factor, and the founding assumptions of neoclassical economics developed in the empty world no longer hold, as the aggregate burden of the human species is reaching, or in some cases even exceeding, the limits of nature at local, regional and planetary level. So to use the metaphor that Mandeli uses, in the past the fish catch was limited by the number of fishing boats and fishermen. Now it's limited by the number of fish and their capacity to reproduce. So more fishing boats will not result in more caught fish. The limiting factor is no longer the man-made capital of boats, but the remaining natural capital of fish population and their aquatic habitat. So the full world is based on a traditional linear economy, which is not efficient at all. Some examples of inefficiency are in the mobility, like cars remain parked 9% of the time, and even when they move, they usually carry 1.5 people at a time. But there are also inefficiency in the built environment. For example, 30% of waste sent to landfill in Europe originates from construction. Offices are occupied half of the day on a working day, not to talk about supply chain like food. 50% of food is lost along the production chain, and more than 90% of global food residue is still sent to landfill. Among the inefficiency of the linear economy, there is waste. In our current economy, we take material from the earth, make products from them, and eventually throw them away as waste. So the process is linear. But why waste is important for our capitalistic economy? Because more production means more waste means more production. So waste is a sign of capitalism success. So when people throw away a product after using it for a short period of time in the spirit of planned obsolescence, they will buy a new one, contributing to growth. But the last tentative in the last year to reconcile economic growth with environmental protection has been the introduction of circular economy. Historically, the concept of circular economy cannot be traced back to a single author or date, as it is inspired by several schools of thought, but in Europe, the broad breakthrough of the circular economy concept is due to the prominent Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which has made it the center of its activities since 2010. So the first circular economy package has been released in 2015 and has been revised more recently as a part of the European Green Deal. Simply put, circular economy advocates the returning of used resources that would otherwise become wastes back into the economy. So the central concept of circular economy is that waste is minimized and products and raw materials are reused as long as intensive as possible, over and over again. In doing so, waste becomes the new raw material. If we look at the scientific literature, circular economy includes several practices such as eco-design, reusing, recycling, collection, distribution, etc. But the common denominator is that innovation and technology can foster the transition to circular economy. Circular economy is indeed often presented as an interdisciplinary field, but in reality, techno-managerial aspects dominate. So technology is central to every aspect of circular economy, as well as the continuous growth. In our just to see project, we criticize some of the aspects of current circular economy practices. In particular, critiques of the rising popularity of circular economy are disparate and scattered over different academic fields. We here emphasize 3 points: the ambiguity of the concept, the feasibility of the circular economy from a biophysical point of view, and the patent lack of a reflection on the political and sociocultural dimensions. And this is the central critique of our Just to See project. The first critique to circular economy concern the ambiguity of the concept of circular economy itself. And because the circular economy builds on an heterogeneous collection of scientific and semi-scientific concepts. For example, ecological economics, industrial ecology, cradle-to-cradle design, performance economy, natural capitalism, and cleaner production. So over 100 definitions of circularity have been inventoried, with the consequence that the term means different things to different people. In fact, the concept of circular economy is a conceptual umbrella that covers a wide range of related concepts in a way that a rational consensus among parties with opposing values and interests can be easily reached. And this means depoliticizing the circular economy concept under a questionable win-win framing for all. For example, the circular economy is often championed by large companies that produce the thinking and innovation, like the Apple circular program, while the consumer is kept doing exactly that, consuming, passive and deprived of any agency to decide how to produce and consume. For this reason, the concept of circular economy has been deemed as the latest iteration of recurrent attempts at reconciling environmental concerns with the unquestioned goal of infinite economic growth. So circularity therefore becomes accepted and absorbed with little space for critical reflection. The second critique is circular economy as a thermodynamic paradox. So due to thermodynamic constraints, no system can be 100% circular, and indeed the current levels of circularity, which is the share of actually recycled material in total processed material, as well as, so the level of circularity in Europe and globally is very low, below the 10%. In particular, considering that we can reach circularity, neglects the thermodynamic principle that one can neither create or destroy matter. Therefore, a future where waste no longer exists, where material loops are closed and products are recycled indefinitely, is impossible. Every loop around the circle creates dissipation and entropy, attributed to losses in quantity, physical material losses, byproducts, and inequality, meaning downgrading. Besides that, serious issue of concern regard the so-called rebound effect, beyond the traditional focus on energy efficiency, to show how rebound effects may apply to a circular economy strategies. Increasing efficiency does not, in fact, necessarily lead to less consumption. It can lead to more. So, for example, while the consumer feel good about resource savings in one area, contributing to the circular economy, it helps them to rationalize using more resources in another. But the core critique of our project, just to see, relies on the fact that the current vision of circular economy are narrowly focused on the economy and on the technology, with a patent lack of a reflection on the political and socio-cultural dimension, as well as on the unintended consequences that a transition to circularity would entail. I'll briefly discuss what I mean when I say lack of reflection on the social dimension. The first point is circular economy as an apolitical win-win solution. So the governance and the political implications of circular economy transition are barely debated in circular economy literature, with no challenges about the current relation of power, politics, and norms, local, national, global regulation, forms of governance. So which new socio-economic dynamics, regulatory challenges, and trade-off emerge from subsequent changes in supply chain and production and consumption processes? Transforming the linear economy, which has remained the dominant model since the onset of the Industrial Revolution, into a circular one is by no means an easy task. So such a radical change entails major transformation of our current production and consumption pattern, which in turn will have a significant impact on the economy, the environment, and society. So in short, the mainstream idea of circular economy rests on the assumption that a market-based economy can enter into an efficient and successful alliance with the environment, maintaining current relations of power, politics, and norms. When I say that there is no debate about the relationships of production, I'm referring to, for example, the global supply chain. So, for example, the circular economy of plastics and metals in Europe and in general in global north has largely to materialize via international shipment, reprocessing, secondary production, and product manufacturing in global south. So this, of course, raises a series of questions regarding the environmental performance of such circularity. The second point of critique regarding the lack of social aspect in the circular economy practices is that regards the circular economy as a geopolitical divide. So the dissemination of the circular economy concept and its implementation has been taking place in several nations and institutions globally, mainly in high-income countries, otherwise known as the global south, the global north. So only few studies have explored the low-income context also referred as Global South, or have sought to understand where the circular economy concept and narrative might complement or conflict with existing priorities and pathways. So this exclusion, the exclusion of Global South in the circular economy debate is inherently paradoxical, as in our globalized world, supply chain and waste cycles are greatly global and play an important role in defining resource relationship between the global north and global south. So nowadays, countries and regions are inextricably linked and interrelated through waste and resource flow. Therefore, Global South will continue gathering critical position in global circular value chains in the future, considering that they are currently major generators of natural resources and producers of manufactured goods, and will soon experience significant consumption levels. Challenges are also posed on a more practical level, as it remains unclear how the role of the circular economy can be materialized in Global South context, where circular practices are often carried on by informal waste pickers and recyclers. Despite some definition of the circular economy emphasize social dimension and in particular social justice, literature seeking to explore this dimension in a systematic way is still scarce. The most common reason for this exclusion is that social and ecological benefits are wrongly conceived as byproduct of the transition and assumed to be achievable by simply decoupling economic growth from the environmental impacts. However, most empirical studies that assess social effects only underline the positive economic growth and employment effects in the European Union and its respective member states. Nevertheless, high uncertainty surrounds the job market in the newly emerging circular economy. Broader patterns of globalization, demographical and technological change will entail profound structural shift in the employment, fundamentally transform the type of work to be done, where it is done, and who is done by. So overall, question of justice have remained unanswered by circular economy literature, thus calling for a more critical and systemic approaches to theorizing and imaging a transition. As we can see, literature analysis shows an overlooking of the social dimension in circular economy evaluation. And even when measured, the social dimension is assessed through simplistic indicators, and it's a very Eurocentric research strand. Our project, our Horizon 2020 project, Just to See, aims at understanding under which condition a responsible, inclusive, and socially just transition to a circular economy is possible. What are the technical, geopolitical, and social factors that can enable or hamper such transformation, and how this aspect can contribute to development of policy measures. So one of the preliminary findings of our project is that the linear economy is not only unsustainable, it is also unjust because value-oriented production is premised on the reproduction of inequality. But at the same time, if not tackled, circular economy models may not only reproduce existing inequalities, allowing for business as usual to continue, but to produce new inequalities. Specifically, we have identified 3 kinds of injustice that need to be addressed for circular economy to be not only sustainable but also just: the environmental justice, the gender justice, and the labor justice. The environmental justice claims that consumption and capital accumulation in Global South is based on environmental degradation and destruction in the peripheries, or in the so-called Global South. So according to this concept, global political and economic factors, and especially the structure of international trade, shape the unequal distribution of environmental harms and human development, so that wealthier nations have disproportionate access to both natural resources and sink capacity for waste in poorer nations. So by externalizing environmental damaging production and disposal activities to Global South countries, Global North countries can enlarge the domestic carrying capacity, meaning the stocks of natural resources, and as well as its sink capacity. Regarding the gender injustice refers to the role, gender justice refers to the role of women in circular economy practices and the unrecognition of women's work. And what we have found in our project is an overrepresentation of women in low value-added informal and end-of-pipe activities in the circular economy, including recycling, reuse, and management, especially in Global South countries, and an underrepresentation of women in higher value-added circular activities, such as industrial eco-design, the development of circular products, and other activities involving greater use of advanced technologies. The labor justice refers to the emergence of workers' inequalities in terms of exploitation of waged work, devaluing exclusion of informal work, alienation, lack of workers' decision-making. In particular, the transition to circular economy bring a range of major implications, including for workers and community who might not be able to secure new employment and livelihood opportunities. So as a sake of example, I will shortly talk about the injustice reproduced in some of the case studies we are analyzing in just. So in just to see, we have 10 different case studies, 5 in Africa and 5 in Europe. We have a very an heterogeneous range of case study with different technologies and different levels of maturity, different supply chain, plastic, food, critical raw materials, different scale of analysis, case studies with local and global implication, and different type of initiatives, including formal governance and also informal governance, especially in Global South. In Global South, we have cases regarding plastic recycling in Morocco, for example, in Zimbabwe. We have also small cooperatives and farm cooperatives in Lowerland, in South Africa, and we have big companies in Spain and in Europe. I will just briefly speak about two examples of case studies we are analyzing in Just to See project to give you some example of the injustice that can be reproduced even when a circular economy transition is meant to happen. So this is one of the case we have is the Ghana case. This site is the second large site for processing electronic waste, which are imported from Europe and US, and one of the most polluted sites in the world. So most items that land here have been rejected as unusable in Europe, but are sent to Africa with the excuse that they are somehow useful to people there. So thousands of people scratch a living here by burning the electronic trash to extract iron, brass, and other valuable metals. So the question here is to what extent circular economy is taking into consideration the global implication of waste treatment, especially in Global South, where there are poor labor and legislative conditions. Another case we are analyzing in Italy by means of interviews, qualitative and quantitative analysis is the ex Silva in Taranto, south of Italy, which is one of the major steel-making plants in Europe. And the European Court of Human Rights condemned Italy for failing to protect citizens from a polluting steel plant, which has been blamed for hundreds of cancer-related deaths. So a civil society plan called Piano Taranto for economic transition from steel manufacturing to tertiary activity, tourism and agroecology via brownfield restoration based on circular economy principles has been launched in May 2018 by a coalition of environmental and community organizations and business actors in the city of Taranto. So this represents a significant effort at shaping a social consensual solution to the jobs versus environment dilemma and to sever financial market, environmental and public health problem on the local scale. So in short, to the unsustainability of a steel-based linear economy. So in this case, the attention is placed on the community mobilization and on the role of workers' agency in the transition to circular economy, which is the role that the local communities and workers can play in the transition to circular economy. These are just two out of the 10 cases we are analyzing in our Just to See project by means of interviews that are going on and field work that is going on, that is in progress, that is still in progress. We will have the first results from the different case studies in few months. So considering that what is our claim, just to see that considering that circular economy is still a relatively recent concept, we believe that it remains a strong necessity to build its theoretical foundation. Otherwise, circular economy runs the risk of lacking systemic validity and critical social relevance. But how we can do that? By mobilizing new knowledge and consider how to engage a wider social range of perspectives. So in our conceptual framework, we take science and technology study concept of technologies of humility as our starting point, drawing on empirical and conceptual elements from a variety of fields. What we propose is to employ social technology, which allows to accommodate the partiality of scientific knowledge and pose the question we should ask of almost every human enterprise that intends to alter society. So each innovation, so what is the purpose? Who will be art? Who benefits? And how can we know? So how the benefits and the burden of this innovation, and in this case of circular economy, will be distributed both geographically and socially in our society. So together, these questions provide a scaffolding for the ethical question we should be asking about the future of circular economy. This conceptual framework can help to expose controversial issues, to surface the normative foundation of technocratic analytic methods, to address the need for plural perspective and social learning, and to bring all these aspects into the dynamics of democratic debate. So I'm just concluding with the preliminary findings. As suggested in Foucault's quotes used in the opening of this presentation, these critiques are more than simply denouncing flaws in the circular economy concept. They also point at the end of the need for questioning how the circular economy is currently conceived, consented, and implemented. The presentation of the critiques shows that there is a need for a renewed, enlarged, and transdisciplinary research agenda on the circular economy. An agenda integrated the can-do orientation of technical science and engineering and with the should-do questions of ethical and political analysis. So to truly flourish, the circular economy needs to be part of a bigger effort to take economic growth, wasteful consumerism, and undemocratic power structure in the global economy. So my simple take-home message are that economic growth is unsustainable environmentally, socially, and economically. And so it's now the time to ask new questions and think outside the box of growth. And that brings us to the end. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention today. And if anyone has any question, I'd be happy to open the discussion. And more than this, if anyone would like more information or has question, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.